Thank you very much. It's always great to be shtatek together in the Harbat Torah with Rabbi Lebowitz, and no relation, but certainly I cherish the friendship that we've been able to develop over the past several years. So the topic that was chosen for tonight. What time should I finish? Okay, so the topic that was chosen for tonight was the topic of Maaser Kesafim, and specifically there were three requests made. Number one is to give some general hadracha about how to give Maaser, where Maaser comes from. Number two is to discuss some interesting shaylas that maybe have come up over the years relating to Maaser Kesafim. And number three was to answer the question of why it is that we don't see everyone who's careful about Maaser becoming suddenly wealthy. Because after all, the Gemara tells us, Aser b'shvil shetis asher. It's a Gemara stuff test that if you give Maaser, you're going to become rich. And it doesn't seem that everybody who gives Maaser becomes rich. I guess we don't know exactly who's so careful about their Maaser. Maybe all the rich people are super careful about their Maaser. But it certainly doesn't seem that if you were to do a study of wealth, that it would necessarily correlate with those who are most careful about Maaser. So we'll try to get to all of those things. The most challenging of them is the second point, is the interesting shaylas relating to Maaser. Most shaylas relating to Maaser are not all that interesting, meaning they're very basic. They come up all the time. People want to know how to cheshbon yeshiva tuition when it comes to Maaser. Young couples who just get married or are getting help from their parents want to know, are they obligated to Maaser? It's not even their own money. But those are the kinds of things people want to know if they're allowed to do mitzvahs with their Maaser money. And what are viable uses of their Maaser money? Those are the kinds of questions that come up most often. I'll share with you two shaylas that came up recently. One shayla related to a family that has some money. They're people of means, but they're not extremely wealthy. And they had enough money that they're able to write a Sefer Torah, which is not a cheap endeavor. It's not an easy thing to do. And typically people try to not only have it before they write a Sefer Torah, they try to save up not just enough money to write a Sefer Torah, but to save up enough money to write a nice Sefer Torah. Those are different things. I was once actually at a Hashkafa Sefer Torah, and the sofer was there, and I didn't know how to make conversation with him. So I said, "Oh, is the Sefer Torah Mahudar?" He said, "No, they didn't pay for a Mahudar Sefer Torah. They paid for a kosher Sefer Torah. So it's kosher," which makes me question whether it's really kosher or not. But that's what that sofer said. So most of the time, people want to write a nice Sefer Torah. But the person said, if he's going to spend whatever it is on $2,000 writing the Sefer Torah, so he's not going to be able to also give Maaser or something like that. The cheshbonos were such that if he's going to spend all that money, he needs to use some of his Maaser money to do that mitzvah. So is it permissible to use Maaser money to write a Sefer Torah? He said, look, I'm not going to use Sefer Torah for my own personal use. It's going to go to the shul, and it's going to be used for Beit Tzibur. So the Ma'anaf Kamina, whether I donate the electric bill of the shul or donate new furniture to the shul, which l'chora you're allowed to use Maaser money for, versus giving a Sefer Torah to the shul. So that was shayla number one. Another shayla that was an interesting shayla that came up with Maaser money, although this one sadly is not as common as we would like it to be. Shayla was, I got a call from a dear friend who's a Rav in California, and he said that one of the members of his shul is a dentist who developed a product. I actually looked it up online. The product is called TheraBreath. This fellow was a dentist, and he had, if you go on the TheraBreath website, it tells you the whole story that his daughter, when she was a teenager, had impossibly bad breath. I don't know why she's okay with that being on the website, but it's on the website that she had impossibly bad breath, that nothing they could do about it. There was none of the classic products were doing anything about it, and he set out to develop this product that solves bad breath and many other dental issues, and he believed in the product that he was developing so much. Apparently, I heard this from another of in California, that he for a tkufa, he lost his house and he had to move to experience. He gave up his dental practice. He put everything he had into this company. He worked really, really hard to develop the company. After a certain point in time, it turned a corner and it started to grow. And last year, he sold the company to a company called Church and Dwight for $580 million. And in one day, and it was a tax-friendly deal, so I think the take-home from that was $495 million. So in one day, he now had $49.5 million of Maaser money to get rid of, or to do mitzvahs and Maaser tovim with. And his shaila was, do I need to give it all this year? Meaning the post can talk about when you're doing your cheshbonos for Maaser, they should do an annual cheshbon for Maaser. We even a semi-annual, once every 6 months is called semi-annual, or is that once every, I don't know. But once every 6 months, once every year, that's really what you're supposed to do. So his impression was, if you're supposed to do a cheshbon like that, then you should probably distribute the funds. So is it proper? Is he required to distribute $50 million in 1 year? He never saw this kind of money before. He never had this kind of money. I mean, the company was doing well in recent times, but this is a whole other league. It happened to be just around the same time I got a call from another friend of mine who's a Rav in Kesafim, who said that he got a call from one of his balabatim who is 40 years old maybe, and the balabas said, I just discovered that I will never have to work another day in my life. What should I do with myself every single day? Like, what's the proper? It turns out that was the child of the guy in California who sold the company for $500 million. So that I thought was also an interesting Maaser Kesafim shayla. So maybe to approach these shaylas, let's take a step back and let's talk a little bit about the role of tzedakah in our lives, and where Maaser Kesafim comes from as a guidepost in tzedakah, or as whether it be a goal or a guide in terms of tzedakah. So Rav Asher Weiss once spoke to a group of Rabbanim, and he told us that he's so impressed that we live in a day and age where so many from people give so much tzedakah. As much as we complain, and Rav Asher Weiss in general does not enjoy when people complain about how terrible of a time we live in, and if only we lived in the good old days, like the Middle Ages, when 3/4 of the children died of disease, and where all sorts of other terrible things were happening. He said we're so lucky to live in the time that we're living in, and not only that we have really high quality people. So there are people that are giving so much tzedakah. He said over something from his Rebbe, from the Klezmerger Rebbe, who is Rav Asher Weiss Rebbe, that in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, that the phrase that concludes the first bracha of Shemona Esrei is Magen Avraham. We refer to all three avos in the bracha of avos of Shemona Esrei, Avraham, Kesafim, Yaakov, but Magen Avraham is the conclusion of the bracha, because the bracha was B'cha Chosmin, that with Avraham Avinu, we're going to be Chosim. We're going to be Chosim the bracha with Avraham Avinu. So the Klezmerger recorded from the Baal Shem Tov that B'cha Chosmin doesn't only mean the Chasimas HaBracha is with a reference to Avraham Avinu, but the Chasima of history is going to be with the Midah of Avraham Avinu. That all of the midos of the avos are critical, the midah of din and the midah of Torah and all of those things, Torah, avoda, but Gemilus Chasadim is the midah of Avraham Avinu, the chachosmin. That's going to be the midah that's most prevalent at the chasima, at the conclusion of the Jewish story, or as we move to the next step of Yemos HaMashiach. And the Mishnah of Pirkei Avos tells us that the world stands on Torah, Avodah, Gemilus Chasadim, and it's not in that order, even though that's not the order of the Avos, right? It starts with Avraham Avinu's Gemilus Chasadim, because Mishnah Avos is identifying for us how history is going to play out. That this idea of doing extra chesed, of doing more chesed than maybe had been done previously, is something that happens in greater measure as we draw closer to the Yemos HaMashiach. I spent about a month in the mountains over the summer, and you think about a place like Camp Simcha, or a place like Camp Hask. I have a son who's a counselor right now. He went with me in my program for a month, and then he went to Camp Hask. He's a counselor there, and the number of people that are engaged in real challenging chesed on a regular basis, it's extremely inspiring. And I told my brother-in-law yesterday that both of our children are counselors in Hask, and it's a lot of very challenging work and very exhausting work. I said these camps are the biggest kasha on the concept of Yeridas Hadoros, because I know that I never did anything like that, nor do I even think that I'd be capable of doing something like that. And yet our children are engaged in this kinds of chesed. The chachosmin, that as we draw closer to Yemos HaMashiach, we find that there is this concept. In fact, I was just learning in the Tanya today, the Baal Tanya writes in Perek Lamed Zayin of the Tanya that tzedakah is singled out in the Gemara Bava Basra as shkula keneged kol mitzvos. There aren't so many mitzvos that are shkula keneged kol mitzvos. Tzedakah, the Gemara Bava Basra, the first Perek Bava Basra, identifies shkula keneged kol mitzvos, but it's even more than that. The Baal Tanya points out that throughout Yerushalmi, you find that whenever the Yerushalmi refers to a mitzvah stam without identifying which mitzvah it is, it's always tzedakah. Tzedakah is whenever the Yerushalmi says mitzvah, it means tzedakah. For example, the Yerushalmi in the 8th parak of Peah, as well as in the 5th parak of Shkalim, writes that Chanin bar Papa will maflig mitzvah b'leile. Rabbi Chanin bar Papa would be maflig mitzvah b'leile. He would take care of the mitzvah. He would distribute mitzvah at nighttime. So the Korban Eidah explains, what does that mean? He would distribute tzedakah at night so as not to embarrass the aniyim that they have to receive, where other people were going to see that they have to take. So he would do his Tomchei Shabbos deliveries at night when no one would be able to see who's getting the delivery, and that way he would not be embarrassed aniyim. But the Yerushalmi didn't say tzedakah; it said mitzvah. Mitzvah stam in Yerushalmi is always tzedakah. In the 7th paragraph of Seches Peah, the Yerushalmi writes that Asar Kodesh Baruch Hu lasos tzel lebali mitzvos kitzila shel bali Torah. That Hashem is going to provide some sort of tzel, some sort of shade for bali mitzvos, like He does for bali Torah. What does it mean, bali mitzvos? Korban Eidah on the spot says those who support Talmidei Chachamim. Bali Torah are the Talmidei Chachamim. Bali mitzvos are those who support the Talmidei Chachamim. Again, you see that mitzvah in general in Yerushalmi refers to tzedakah. So the Baal Tanya explains that the reason for this is that in order to bring the geula, we need to fulfill the mitzvos for Ramach Evarim, that with all of our limbs, and that thereby will animate all of the Evarim with the Aryeh Sof Baruch Hu that he talks about. These are very deep concepts, obviously, but he says that in order to bring the geula, we need to remove or to elevate the noga within each of our Evarim, and elevate them with the Aryeh Sof Baruch Hu to have, so for example, you eat matzah, it's a tikkun of the mouth. You put on tefillin on your arm, it's a tikkun of the arm. But he says when a person does tzedakah, it means that he's taking the money that he earned with his entire body, his entire effort, often his entire intellect. Everything that he puts into earning a living, that's most of our waking hours, very often are spent on trying to earn a living. And then you take that money and you give that for stuff, you do a mitzvah with that. That is a tikkun for all of Ramach Evarim. He says, and even if you're a trust fund baby, even if you never had to work for a day in your life, the Baal Tanya writes, but still, even if that money that you have could be used for anything, it could be used for a jacket to warm your body. It could be used for shoes to use on your feet. It could be used for anything. It could be used for food to put in your mouth. It could be used for anything that you could do in your life. And therefore, by using money, which is something that's over l'socher, that you can use to buy anything with, you're taking that which encompasses everything and dedicating it toward the mitzvah, and that therefore is the greatest tikkun. So it's a really wonderful thing that we have shilas about tzedakah, and that people are thinking about tzedakah, and that people are thinking about the best way to give tzedakah. So where does it come from that we give Maaser Kesafim? So meaning the Torah says you have a mitzvah of tzedakah. The Torah doesn't say you have the Torah doesn't give a shear to the mitzvah of tzedakah. It never says you have to give 10% of your money to tzedakah. So in the commentary of the Balei Tosos on the Torah, they cite the Balei Tosos cite a medrash that Yaakov Avinu was tikin l'seis Maaser min hamamon. The Yaakov Avinu was misaking to give Maaser from Mammon because Yaakov Avinu says, "Kol asher titein li, aser aser lach." And the Gemara in Tainis Darshans aser b'shvil shittas asher, that if a person gives 10%, and it's a skula that'll become wealthy. In fact, in the Sefer Menorah Sama'or, he highlights the importance of giving Maaser, and he says, "Lefichach al yirfa adam yado min ha'Maaser." So a person should not be nisrashel about giving Maaser. The person should be disciplined in giving Maaser. He should really give it appropriately. And And by doing that, by giving Maaser on everything, whether you have several jobs, so don't only give from the job that you earn your primary income from. Wherever you have money coming in, you should be giving Maaser from. It says, "Bezeh molcho l'mamono." In that way, it's going to be a melach, it's going to be a salt for his money. That's based on the Gemara, that expression is based on the Gemara in Kesafim stuff above. The Gemara in Kesafim says, "Melach mamon chasei." That the salt, the preservative of money, salt preserves meat. So the preservative of money, the melech of money, is chaser, is to give up some of the money. The Gemara says that in the context of the daughter of Nakdim ben Gurion. In the aftermath of the Korban, the Yochanan and Zakkai saw the daughter of Nakdim ben Gurion, and she was picking out barley, undigested barley from animal excrement to find something to eat. That's how starving she was. And he said, what happened to, Nakdim ben Gurion was the richest man in Yerushalayim. What happened to all the money? And she married rich. A lot of times that happens, right? That there are like shidduchim that are like mergers, right? Like the shadchanim to the stars only deal with these kinds of shidduchim, right? So it's like a merger. So that was that kind of shidduch that she had. And he says, your ksuba, I remember, like everyone was marveling at the ksuba. Nowadays, when you go to an Ashkenazi wedding, the ksuba just says the same amount of money for everybody. You can't tell how rich a person is based on the ksuba. It's Masayim Zuz, and Meis Kum because of Sarov for Tosefes ksuba, and Meis Kum because of Sarov Achim Ken for the chassan that she brings into the marriage. So it's always the same amount of money. Go to a Sephardi wedding and you'll hear money. Right? Then they actually identify dollar amounts, say, whether it's $100,000, whatever they put into the ksuba. So it used to be that everyone was starting, and they had to they had to put numbers into the ksuba. So I think McGregor's daughter, the ksuba was like it was an unbelievable amount of money in the ksuba. So she says, don't you know what the Chacham say, that melach mamon chaser, that the preservative of money is chaser, and they didn't give enough money, and because my father didn't give enough money, so that's why we lost all of our money. That's the context of that Gemara. So that's what the Menorah Samara is referring to, that if a person is very metactic about Maaser, you won't have to worry about where your money is going to go. Meaning it's counterintuitive, right? Meaning because you would think that the more money you give up, that means you don't have it anymore, right? Meaning the more you give away, then the less you have. So it's we need this haftacha from Chazal to tell us that even though it seems shalom b'derech hatev, it seems connected that I'm going to give up money, and because I give up money, I'm going to have more money. It happens to be that in secular literature, they've done studies like this, where they found that it's not connected at Teva. It's actually quite consistent with Teva. They find that more generous people tend to have more business opportunities because people like them and want to throw business their way and want to help them. So there's a book called A Give and Take by someone named Adam Grant, who's a professor in Wharton, and the whole book it's an amazing Musar sefer, because the whole book is about being a giver, about the value of being a giving person. And essentially what they found is that more giving people tend to be more socially accepted. And because of that, people are always trying to reciprocate. So they're always trying to help. So if a person is giving, it's not kineged ateva, this haftacha of Chazal, it's lefi ateva. That the Chazal tell us that you'll be okay if you give a lot of money away, if you give a lot of tzedakah. There is a machlokas though, this din of Maaser specifically, of giving 10%. Anytime you give tzedakah, it's a mitzvah d'oraisa, right? So 10%, what is that? Is that a chiyuv d'oraisa? Is that a shir d'oraisa of what you have to do? Right? Meaning you have a mitzvah of lulav d'oraisa. It's a shir. It's got to be 3 tvachim plus an extra tvachim today l'naneabo. And if it's pachas week a shir, then you're not the mitzvah. So is there a shir of tzedakah? It doesn't seem that way because if you give pachas, if you give 8% to tzedakah, or kol shirei chacham keinu, right? When the chacham give a shir, it's always precise. Let's say you give 9.9%. You miscalculated by a little. You give 9.9% of your money to tzedakah. What, did you not do mitzvah d'oraisa? Of course you did. Every penny you give is a key of mitzvah d'oraisa. What about all the shiurim being so precise? And if your hadassim are just a centimeter less than 3 tefachim, you're not going to say the mitzvah. It doesn't even count. Because it seems that this is not a shear in that sense. It's not a shear in the sense that this is what the minimum requirement for tzedakah. Everything you give is a fulfillment of tzedakah by shiurim of mitzvahs, and that says even being slightly off would ruin the entire mitzvah. That's what the Gemara talks about in the Seches Bava Basra in the second paragraph. The Gemara talks about how Chazal assessed that if a bird is not yet able to fly, it will hop away from its nest up to 50 amos, but it won't hop away more than 50 amos. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the Shaila, he raised his hand in class and he said, and what if the bird has 1 foot over the 50 amma line and 1 foot within the 50 amma line? So did it come from that nest or was it dropped by a passerby? Meaning you're going to tell me that the bird could go 50 ammas, can't go one step more than 50 ammas? Says Gemara, Ba'alda, Afkul Rabbi Yirmiyah Beit Midrasha. They threw him out of yeshiva for asking such a Shaila. So why did they throw him out of yeshiva for asking such a Shaila? It's a good Shaila, right? Meaning, so the Rishonim explained they threw him out of yeshiva because he was questioning the shiurim of the Chachamim. If the Chachamim gave a shiur and they said it's 50 amos, that means it's not 50 amos and an inch. It's 50 amos. That's the shiur. But it doesn't seem that tzedakah is such a shiur. That Maaser rather is such a shiur. Every dollar you give to tzedakah is a doraisa. So where does Maaser come from? So that's a machlokas, whether it's a chiyuv min haTorah, which is implied by Tosos and Mesachas Tainis over there in Daftas. Perhaps a chiyuv midrabanan, which is the way some read Tosos. However, the Bach paskins that it's a minhag. The Bach writes that Maaser is a minhag. Now, lest you say, oh, okay, that's not my minhag, and therefore I'm okay. My father and grandfather, I come from a long line of stingy people. Our minhag is not that way. It's not that kind of minhag. This is not like a family minhag. This is a minhag of Klal Yisrael. And sometimes a minhag could be just as serious, if not more serious, than a halachah. The Chassam Sofer has in several tshuvas where he suggests that a minhag sometimes takes on the status of a neder and therefore becomes a daraisa, which means that sometimes it should be treated more seriously than a din d'Rabbanan. But when you have a minhag is subject to heichon shenahagu or heich shenahagu. It's subject to how it was accepted. And probably the minhag was accepted in situations where it's reasonable, but they probably did not accept the minhag in situations where a person is not making any money, where a person is not able to meet his basic needs. If it were a din, so the dinim apply no matter what. I mean, there are limits to how much you have to spend. But the dinim are the dinim. If it's a minhag, it could be that it's subject to what would have been reasonable and what people would have accepted upon themselves. There's a machlokas in contemporary posting about this. The Stipler is quoted in Professor Delu that is saying that even a kollel guy who's being supported has to give Maaser. And Chaim Kanievsky says the same in the name of the Chazon Ish, right? Meaning that was all family. That was they once asked Chaim Kanievsky what happens if there's a machlokas between the father and the shver, between Tata and the shver. Do you pass like the Stipler? Or do you pass like the shver? Do you pass like Rebbe Yashiv? So he said, neither. We pass like the Chazon Ish in our family. That's like the Petra. Everyone passes like the Petra. That there's no shayla. They pass like the uncle. The more
when it came to Maaser, giving to a kayan, the Mishnah does give if you're stingy, if you're in.
So when it comes to truma, Maaser is precise. When it comes to actual Maaser, it's got to be exactly precise. When it comes to truma, there's leeway, right? That there's and really when it comes to truma, chita achas poteres is kalakri. Even a tiny amount will work as truma, although that's not even rising to the level of stingy, right? 1/60th is stingy, but chita achas technically would work. But Maaser has got to be very precise. But I think the more prevalent opinion is expressed by Sherbach and Shuvas Lagos in Chiluk Aleph Tavkov Samach, where he writes that Shekol Misha Matzavo Dochuk At Shazakuk LaAzarim Me'acherim. If a person lives and has a hard time making a living to the point that they need to accept help from other people, Ve'enu Chai B'derech Masaros Kla, and they don't live an extravagant lifestyle. That's an important caveat, because there are people that receive help from other people, but live what Rav Sherbach would consider an extravagant lifestyle, and perhaps what we would consider an extravagant lifestyle. I think in general, it's so out of control already. The extravagance in the way that people live is so beyond, what's considered bare necessities and basic needs. It's hard to imagine in America people that are not living well, I shouldn't say it's hard to imagine people, but many of us cannot say about ourselves that we are not living b'mosoros klal with anything extra. Of course, part of it has to do with how we define what's extra, but it happens to be. It's just there's so. I was just there so recently, and so many of my chaverim were telling me that one of the biggest chaverim who moved to Israel. One of the biggest differences is that it's just like how magushim the lifestyle is in America, and how in Eretz Yisrael they haven't yet caught up. They haven't, to that level of obsession with gashmis. Even the kids are more interested in different things. There are different things that excite them than money and stuff and things that excite us and that excite children. I heard a beautiful idea from Rabbi Yadad Goldberg. He said that. So there's a halacha that when you go to the cemetery, you have to tuck your tzitzis in, right? Because when you go to the cemetery, it's lower the rush to mock the dead. A person dies, he's no longer able to do mitzvahs, so you can wear your tzitzis out. It's a mockery of the dead that they're not able to do mitzvahs. He said it's a fascinating thing, though. There's no halacha that when you go to a cemetery, that you're not allowed to take your private jet, land on the runway right next to the cemetery, walk in with your Rolex, your custom-made suit, your $2,000 shoes. There's no halacha. There's no halacha that you're not allowed to do that, right? Why isn't that low the rush? And the answer is because they're not jealous of that. They're laughing at you, right? They're laughing. That you think we're going to be jealous of that? They're laughing at. What are you wasting your life chasing when you're doing all these things? But be that as it may, so Shemrut says that if a person needs to receive help from other people, he's not making a living. Very often, young couples, when they first get married, the guy's learning at Kollel or is in graduate school or something else, and they're not making any living yet. So he says that it's not necessary to give Maaser under such circumstances. But he then quotes from the Chazon Ish, but no one ever loses from giving Maaser. So he says, I always tell a young couple in that kind of situation, you need rishos from your parents. If they're paying your bills, you can't charge a 10% premium, for them to pay your bills. Like you need to have a conversation with them. Very often, I find the parents say they love dafka ma'aser, but to make sure that there's some money that you can give for tzedakah. It's very important that young people be trained to give tzedakah. It's very easy to forget how to give if you never train yourself to give. It's very easy to get used to the idea of not exercising that giving muscle. And it's very important for Klal Yisrael that people continue to exercise that giving muscle. So most parents, I think, are very understanding about that and trying to make sure that there should be some ability to give some nominal amount for tzedakah. The question then becomes, okay, so what can you use the money for? Right, meaning you have this Maaser money, you try to fulfill Maaser, which, by the way, the best eitzah that I found in terms of being able to do it without too much of a yetzer hara, not to give Maaser, is that as soon as money comes in, have a separate account, that 10% of the money just goes into that account, and that's a charity account. And that's it. Meaning, so then as soon as the money's there, you don't even view it as your money. It's very easy to write big checks from money that you're not going to be allowed to access anyway. That it's not like a choice. Should I get myself a new car or should I make this donation? If 10% goes into that account, so that account is going to be funding only tzedakah. So it's just a question of which tzedakah you're going to be funding with it. But it's not a choice of me versus tzedakah. It's this tzedakah versus that tzedakah. That's certainly the better way to do it. But Rav Weiss had an interesting chiddush about buying the Sefer Torah. Let's go back to that shaila about buying the Sefer Torah with tzedakah money. He pointed out that the minhag, based on the Torah Chaim in Sanhedrin Daf Kaf days, the minhag is that when a person writes the Sefer Torah, not to give away the Sefer Torah to the shul, but to lend it to the shul. That's what why is that the minhag? Where did that come from? Why does Torah Chaim suggest that? Because Torah Chaim writes that if you write a Sefer Torah and then you give it away, you weren't Mekayim Mitzvah Taryag, the 613th mitzvah of the Torah of Kisvu L'chames Shira, is also writing a Sefer Torah. You have to write a Sefer Torah and keep it in order to be Yotzei the mitzvah. So what people do is they'll write it and then they'll put it on loan to the shul. They'll give it as a loan to the shul, and that way they're Mekayim the mitzvah of Ksivas Sefer Torah. It happens to be that there are other achronim that disagree with that and hold that you are Yotzei because the Yikra mitzvah is the Ksiva, and as long as you did the Ksiva or you commissioned the Ksiva, you did the mitzvah, and it doesn't then matter what you do with it. Maybe you can give it away. Rav Weiss thinks that that's difficult to accept. It's an interesting ha'ara that he has. He says we never find a mitzvah that you could do just once in your entire life that doesn't require having some toelet, some long-term effect. Meaning there are Maisa-oriented mitzvahs and there are result-oriented mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs like, why do you take lulav? Because when you take lulav, you did the mitzvah. That's Ratzon Hashem, you did the mitzvah. There's no like result that comes out of that. There's no like long-term impact of taking lulav. And that's why there's a mitzvah of lulav for all 7 days of Sukkot, and it's going to come back again next year and the year after. Meaning those kinds of mitzvahs, you can have a Maisa-oriented mitzvah. But anytime you have a mitzvah, says Rav Asher Weiss in his Sefer and Talmud Torah, Siman Aleph, anytime you have a mitzvah that you only have to do once in your entire life, it has to leave a long-term impact. So if you're going to do a mitzvah and then you're going to do Ksiva Sefer Torah, then you're going to give it away to the shul, you're not going to have it anymore. He says it could be that that's not a Q mitzvah Ksiva Sefer Torah. Therefore, most I know in my shul, the shul doesn't own any Sefer Torah. All of our Sefer Torah are on loan from different families. We have a shtar that with each family, what we are, and not allowed to do. Does have to be in a fireproof safe. Does have to be locked. This, that, right? So who's responsible for fixing it if something happens? Recently, when the Sefer Torah someone was doing Hagba, the Eitz Chaim just snapped right off. So who's got to fix that? These kinds of things are pretty standard because most of the time people give it on loan to the shul. So it would follow that
it should be a shomer. In that case, wouldn't it should be a shomer chinam?
The shul is shomer, but a shomer chinam could be makabel extra responsibility on himself if that's the deal, right? So if you put it in a shtar, then that's what they're being makabel. So now that's what they're being makabel. But it would turn out, it says Rav Asher Weiss, if the shul only has a Sefer Torah on loan, and let's say I read the Sefer Torah. So I own the I should be zochel one day. Let's say I own the Sefer Torah, but it's given to the shul on loan. But I'm the real owner of it. So if I'm the real owner of it, how can I use Maaser money for something that I still own? Meaning Maaser money, if I'm going to buy furniture for the shul, I'm going to pay the electric bill of the shul, I'm going to buy sparm for the shul. So that's really for the shul. But a Sefer Torah that the shul is using. But it's my asset, and if I ever want to sell it, not so plush that you're allowed to sell the Sefer Torah. Okay, Lisa Isha or whatever, I want to sell the Sefer Torah, so it's my asset. It belongs to me. Not only that, my family owns a Sefer Torah. I had a great uncle that passed away in like 1980, and he was a Holocaust survivor. He had no children, so he left money for a Sefer Torah to be written. That should be his kiyum after he leaves this world. So we still have the Sefer Torah, and we have it we keep it in my shul so that it can get used once in a while. And when I go to Camp Kaylee for a month in the summer, I take it with me because my Sefer Torah. No one can tell me not to take it with me, so I take it with me. So how can that be done with Maaser money? So Rav Asher Weiss suggests that he thinks you can do it with Maaser money. He thinks you're allowed to use Maaser money to write the Sefer Torah if it's going to be on loan to the shul. He said the din that it's on loan to the shul, and that you're maintaining ownership of it, that's the din of Choshen Mishpah. That Medina Choshen Mishpah, you are the owner of it. Maaser money is not dependent on Choshen Mishpah. Maaser money is dependent on, is this something that's providing a service to the tzibur? Or is this something that's providing a service to Aniyim? Or not? And as long as it's providing a service to the shul or to Aniyim or something like that, then you're allowed to use Maaser money for it, even though in Dinim Amanis, in Choshen Mishpah, you own it. It's a big chiddush, but that's what he suggests when it comes to using Maaser money to write a Sefer Torah.
I can do any sort of chesed.
Any sort of chesed for the community or for Aniyim. Yeah.
Any service that's going to be used.
Right. Not necessarily to do with your own personal mitzvahs, right? That there's a marbil that's quoted by the Darkei Moshe and others that you're not allowed to do your own personal mitzvah. You can't buy a lulav with your mitzvah, right? But if you're buying an extra pair of tefillin for the shul, right? You're buying an extra pair of tefillin for someone comes to shul, they don't have tefillin, that you're allowed to do, right? Because that's something that's being used by the community.
So you're writing a Sefer Torah, you're paying to write a Sefer Torah. That's your own personal mitzvah. So you just said you cannot use Maaser money for a personal mitzvah.
Yeah, but because right, good point. But Rav Asher Weiss thinks that since it's the asset is being used by the community for the community, that's good enough to be able to use Maaser money.
Most of the time, the shul don't need the Sefer Torah. We have 6, 7, there's 31 bags. So how does that
Right. Yeah, Baruch Hashem, this is also something that in our generation, we're zocheh to such to such problems that the shuls have too many Sefer Torah.
What about tuition though? If it's my obligation.
Right. So the tuition question has to be dealt with on two levels. first of all, lechatchila, is there any portion of it that can be used for my money? And second of all, maybe I'm patur from myself because I still have chovos that I have to pay, including tuition money. We said before that if you that if you don't have enough money to live or to take care of your own chovos, then Maaser is only a minhag and you're patur from Maaser Kesafim. So on the first level, in terms of can you use Maaser money to pay tuition, so most of the folks can assume that you cannot unless part of the tuition includes a mandatory donation to the scholarship fund. Meaning some schools, and I remember getting tuition bills from some of my kids' yeshivas where they would actually break it down for you. They would say, let's just to pick a round number, right? Let's say the tuition was $10,000, halavai, right? So they just to pick a round number, right? So they would say, it costs us, based on all the fundraising that we do and philanthropy and everything else, the dinner and everything else, it should, what it should cost us is $8,000 a student. Elamai, not every parent is going to be able to pay $8,000 a student. So we're gonna require parents who could afford it to pay $10,000 so that they're funding these scholarship accounts essentially. They're funding scholarships for other students. So if that's the case, the extra $2,000 that you're obligated to pay, but it's not really for your child. Your child only costs $8,000. Really costs a lot more, but after the philanthropy and after the dinner and after everything else, what's left is $8,000. So when you're giving those extra $2,000, that might be actual Maaser money, meaning that might cover $20,000 of earnings when you give that $2,000. And not every yeshiva is so eager to break things down like that for you, because they say, what do you mean? It costs way more than we charge in tuition to actually educate. And that's why we got to go knocking on people's doors and asking for philanthropic donations. And that's why we have to run a dinner and we have to do, one of these online funding, whatever, we have to hustle and we have to hire an executive director and do all these things because it costs more than that. But that's a mahalim. That's a mahalim. Now, the question then becomes, if I can't afford to pay tuition money, so I'm going to get tuition assistance, which is essentially that money is coming from somewhere. Meaning, I'm taking money that is donated to the school in order to allow for tuition assistance. Which Rav Shatz always told us, don't be embarrassed if you need tuition assistance. You got to apply for tuition assistance. He said when he was sending his children to yeshiva, he got a lot of tuition assistance. He said since then he's paid it back many times over with donations over the years, and you should never forget that, right? When you take tuition assistance, that school that provided that yeshiva that provided tuition assistance should then be at the top of your list for the rest of your life, probably, and in terms of your donations, right? You're going to want to pay it forward and to help others. So, but l'chora, if a person is not able to do both Maaser and tuition is a chov that takes precedence over Maaser. Let's say you're in debt and you owed somebody a lot of money. So paying back the chov, priyas bal chov mitzvah, that's a din d'oraisa, right? That would take precedence over Maaser as well. But I want to get back now to this shaila of the $50 million of Maaser money. Right? Let's assume that we all have this problem. Tomorrow you invent, I don't know, something that you also sell your company for $500 million, right? So now you have $50 million. You never saw $50 million at one time, and now you have $50 million of Maaser money. So do you have to give it in 1 year? So what are you tying in? You have to give it in 1 year?
No.
Why not? First. My first question before we even get to any of that is, why are you only giving $50 million? Meaning, if you made $500 million, maybe you should only give Maaser, right? Meaning, l'chora, the Gemara tells us that you're not supposed to give more than 20% of your money. It's possible so you don't spend more than 20% of your money in any bit. So we assume that applies to tzedakah as well. But you're supposed to give up to 20% of your money if you have plenty of money. If you have plenty to live off, you should give 20%. So it should be $100 million. Shouldn't be. What?
He sold it for $500 million.
He sold it for $585 million in a super tax-friendly deal, apparently, according to the internet, where he walks away with $495 million.
So it is post-tax.
Yeah, post-tax. So meaning money that you never saw is not your money, right? But
$5 million would be 10%.
So what?
5 million.
50 million would be 10%. So l'chora, he should give 100 million. Rav Sheffer pointed out that
Generally put that money in the foundation.
Oh, so that's it. So Sheffer pointed out that not only Hamvazis Ali Vazis Yosef Mechomesh, we should give up until the Chomesh, that there's an exception to Ali Vazis Yosef Mechomesh. There's an exception to the rule that you're not supposed to do more than 20%, and that is if you're an Ashir Muflag. It's an exception that an exceptionally wealthy person is supposed to give more than 20% of his money to tzedakah. So maybe it should be more than 100. I would imagine the guy who just sold $500 million has that would constitute. That would qualify as an Ashur Muflad. So maybe it should be more than 20% of his money that goes to tzedakah.
That money's in an account, now it's getting.
One second. We'll get to it. So, one second. So, Rosh has told us many times. I think Daphne wants to set an example. He told us that he gives close to 50% of his money to tzedakah. So we said, Rabbi, it's against Halachah. How do you let him give 50% of your money to tzedakah? It says, she said, no, but there's an exception. An Ashur Muflag is allowed to give more than 20%. He says, I'm an Ashur Muflag. He says, why you pays me way more than I need? I know what why his salaries are. It's not, most people would have to find that as an Ashur Muflag. He doesn't own an automobile. It's not a car. So he's got more money than. So okay, again, what we consider needs is a little bit different. Now the question really becomes, I mean, there are several levels to address this question. Let's assume he's going to get somewhere between $50 and $100 million. Let's assume, leaving out the Ashur Muflag stuff, somewhere between $50 and $100 million that's done that. To make a person who never saw this kind of money, distribute that amount of money within a year seems to be so irresponsible. Meaning, I don't think there's a way to distribute that money responsibly when you don't have that kind of experience of how to distribute that kind of money. I mean, if I could reference something from my youth, there used to be a movie called Brewster's Millions. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Something, right? There was the premise of the movie was there was this guy that was given, like, I don't remember the numbers, but let's say $30 million, and he was told you have to get rid of all of it in a month, and then you'll yarshin your deceased uncle's $300 million, but only if you get rid of all $30 million in a month. And he was like, and you have nothing to show for it at the end. He's like, how do I get rid of the whole movie was him trying to get rid of $30 million a month. He figured out how to do it. He ran for mayor. Because so you could, so that was the kunz of the movie. So you're gonna have this guy running around like a chicken without a head, trying to give away money and throw away money and run for mayor and do that. I mean, it's crazy. You can't give away that kind of money in that amount of time. Now the post can talk about the Chofetz Chaim writes in Abbas Chesed that you're supposed to do an annual cheshbon of Maaser money, but he doesn't say that you have to distribute it annually. That you have to have a cheshbon annually, so you can know exactly what to set aside, and then you can put Rav Azan writes in the Julie. You should have a box. I don't recommend a box for this guy, but you should have a box that you put that money aside in, and that box is for tzedakah. And you know that money you don't have access to. Nowadays they call such a box for this kind of money a foundation. People with that kind of money set up a foundation. All the money that goes into the foundation gets distributed to charities at a reasonable pace, and there's a process of deciding who gets what, which charities get what. People with that kind of money have to know how to handle it. Meaning it's an achrayus. It's not something that's easy. A person comes into that kind of money. I'm not the kind of such a person. They have a tremendous achrayus to figure out how to distribute it properly. You know how many halachos there are about how to distribute Aryeh Ircha Kodman and then Aryeh Yisrael and what proportion exactly and who qualifies as Aryeh Ircha. What about your yeshiva? What about your shul? And what about the fact that everyone's asking you for money and people you didn't even know that you were related to or wherever your friends all of a sudden become your best friends. All of the gut reaction is, okay, I want to make this person happy and that person happy and that person, but that's not the responsible thing to do. You have to really assess where the money can have the greatest impact and where it's needed. In addition to that, to give one lump sum of $50 million. Let's say the person says, I'm gonna, I think that the children of a certain community could really use a football stadium. So I'm going to build them a football stadium for $50 million. So first of all, that's crazy. And second of all, that would be one act of giving, where I'm going to build them a new yeshiva building for $50 million. So that's one act of giving. The Rambam writes very famously in the Parish of Mishnayos and Pirkei Avos, the Mishnah says, Hakol lefi rov ha'ma'aseh, and the Rambam says, yeah, Hakol lefi rov ha'ma'aseh, not Hakol lefi godel ha'ma'aseh. That the Rambam says, if you have $100 to give for a tzedakah, or $100 million to give tzedakah, better to give $1 100 times than to give $100 at once. Because the person has to train themselves, Pashtus is me, because the person has to train themselves to be a giver and to constantly be giving. So to just put it all in one lump sum in one distribution would seem to be incorrect.
All right, what does that mean practically? Let's say you're gonna give $360. That mean I should give $10,
So, okay, good. So there's obviously a balance, right? You're not going to give a penny at a time. That's ridiculous. My Talmidim this year very much wanted me to grow a beard. So after Sfira, they were lobbying that I should go. I said, you have to talk to my wife. So at the same time, I came out with the Sefer this year, so they were Venmoing. I don't have Venmo, my wife has. So they're Venmoing my wife the money. So then they had my wife's Venmo, and you can leave a note on the Venmo. So they started leaving notes like, let Rebbe keep the beard, and then they just started sending like a penny on the Venmo toward the beard fund, things like that. So obviously, if we start paying, we're going to start paying a penny here and there. That's ridiculous. So the best way is probably to give some reasonably impactful amount, but getting yourself into a consistent habit of giving. And also, meaning obviously, if you're a person who has $100 million to give away, $50 million to give away, and you only write $180 checks, that's terrible. Meaning that's not going to make anybody happy, and nor should it. Meaning your small checks should look different than other people's small checks. Meaning if a small check for me, if a typical check for me is going to be $180, for something like that, it might be $18,000, that he's going to give. But that's also a small amount for him to give at a time. And you have to look also where it's going to be most impactful. But again, it's a real achrayus. And in order to fulfill that achrayus, I think it's very, very important that the person, in order to fill that achrayus, that the person does it very carefully. I just wanted,
on that, you're putting the money in a separate account. Is it considered tzedakah before you give it, or once you set it aside? Is what I asked before. It's going to gain some interest.
So I think all of that interest goes to tzedakah. All of that interest goes to tzedakah. Yeah, there's a shayla whether you're allowed to invest in it at all. Sometimes we have a case of my son, someone dies young and didn't have life insurance, and they raise, we do one of these raises, and they raise whatever $1 million for the family. So what do you do with that money? You just let it sit in an account, or do you invest it where? So it's a shayla. If you're going to invest it, most folks will say you're not allowed to invest that all aggressively. Not unless there's someone guaranteeing every dollar that's lost. Sometimes you'll have that. You'll have a kavir that will say, invest it aggressively, and whatever it loses, I'll make up. Meaning if it loses, I'll make up for it. But unless you have someone generous like that, it has to be very, very safe. And like a bank account is a very safe investment that will yield very, very little. Because you could have, like we've had recently, where all the investments are going down to where it's. So it happens to be that this the Rav who sent me the Shaila told me he spoke to Rav David Cohen. It was about a year ago. The Shaila came up a little less than a year ago, and Rav David Cohen said you should give it away. He should give it away right away because with Biden's policies, the inflation is about to get out of control, and the money's not going to go nearly as far as it could have gone. So you want to maximize it. Yeah, that's really, he was right. He was right. At the time, I'm like, what does he know? Turns out he was right. So, but that was what Dr. Cohen said at the time. Others said, no, you got to set it up in a foundation, and in the long run, money grows, and in the long run, it's going to be better, and it's going to have a greater impact. Everyone seems to agree that you have to do what's really best for the aniyim. We are out of time. I wanted to get into a little bit of why is it that not everybody who gives tzedakah becomes rich? A minute or two. Okay, so there's a discussion of why it is. The Gemara says aser b'shvil shetes asher. The Gemara says in a few places, if you give tzedakah al menashi yichya b'nei, that Aryeh is tzaddik gamor. According to some Rishonim, the Gersa is Aryeh tzedakah gamor. That you're allowed to do it for the sake of getting rich. You're allowed to give tzedakah dafka for an ulterior motive, not just me'avas Hashem, u'me'iras Hashem. So there's a discussion in Rishonim why that's okay. Meaning, it doesn't seem that you're allowed to do that with other mitzvahs. So it happens to be that in Shulchan Aruch we paskin that it's only a din by tzedakah. The Radvaz writes in the Tshuva that you're allowed to do that by tzedakah because it's takanas ani. That if that's what's going to be, that's what's going to encourage people to give more tzedakah. So takanas ani, we allow you to give even for ulterior motives to become wealthy. The Ramah says that that's only dafka by Nesilas Maaser, but not by all tzedakah. That only by Nesilas Maaser you can give l'nasos HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to test Hashem and see if He's really going to make you rich. In fact, my Rebbe Rav Shachter Shlita has a Maaser from his Rebbe from the Salvation that when you make a mishaberach after you get an aliyah in the shul that you have to give money. Because otherwise, it's doing any other mitzvah. Bishvil yivarech. That's something called iyun tefillah, which is aser, and you're not allowed to say that I'm only doing this mitzvah because of, except for tzedakah. Tzedakah is the only exception where you're allowed to do it. So if Rav Shachter comes to visit your shul and you make a mishaberach, he'll always say bishvil yitain tzedakah. So he said once from Salvation came to yeshiva. And the Gabbai was so happy to see Salvation davening at that minyan, so he made him mishaberach after his aliyah. It was a weekday, and he made him mishaberach. So Salvation said, okay, he's going to give money. So he's going to give X amount of dollars to the yeshiva. So the Gabbai said, Salvation, he's more excited. So he said, I'll make another mishpah. So he made a mishaberach for Salvation's family, and then for his whatever. And he kept and each mishaberach, Salvation kept saying, money. Like each time he was milking him dry because he wouldn't do a mishaberach unless there was money involved. But so it is permissible when it comes to tzedakah to be minasa HaKadosh Baruch Hu in that way, to test HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Question is, why don't people become rich from tzedakah? So this question comes up in another place as well. It comes up in Yeridei and Rish Samachein Hilchos Bris Milah. The Ramah puts in Maril that a person shouldn't be a sandik and a bris for two different children within the same family. Because when you're a sandik and a bris, it's a skula for ashiras. Because the Medrash says being a sandik is like being makter k'taras, and by k'taras chadash l'parva'u, you always have a new person being makter k'taras because it's a skula for ashiras. So over there, all the poskim ask, wait a second, I know a lot of people that served the sandik and they never became rich. There are people that became, you ever see Reb Chaim Kanievsky live? You know how many brisim he was sandik at? You know how many brisim Rav Elyashiv was, when my brother lived in Mila, in Eretz Yisrael, from Maishla, all they did was I hung out by Rav Elyashiv every morning and they kept on bringing baby after baby after baby where he was sandik. Where's Rav Elyashiv's Bentley? He never became rich. So this is a kasha that they ask. So the Lagon writes, Lori inu sandik mesasher. Says we've never seen it. It just doesn't happen. So why not? So and all the answers over there work for tzedakah as well. The Chassam Sofer writes in Chuvas or Chaim Sim Kufn Ches that it's possible that the averus of the sandik prevent him from receiving that blessing. Meaning that maybe he was supposed to be rich, but it's a difficult calculus to figure out schar and onesh and what a person deserves or not. What? So one second. So then that's why you need shlemah. The Makor Chesed quotes from the Ma'orei Nayin that the guarantee that Chazal have of Aser B'Shvil Shekas Asher is fulfilled by a person being blessed with the character trait of being Sameach B'Chalko, Ezu Ashir, HaSameach B'Chalko, and that's what it means, Ashirus. And that's the true definition of wealth. Rav Sternbach in the Tshuva, in the Chelek Aleph in Tafluf Pei Daled, says that wealth is not only with money. It could be wealth in nullifying any xeris ros against the person, against the person's family. They say that they asked the stipend this question. You were standing at so many person, where's all your money? And he said, what do you mean? I'm an Asher Muflag. I have a son like Reb Chaim. Who can you imagine a bigger Ashirus than that? And then the final answer, the Chidah in Pesach Einayim in Yuma Daf Chavav, says that the level of wealth that a person experiences can have a direct correlation with how much love he does the mitzvah with. So it could be a seven shul sasher, but if you're not giving it with the proper amount of kavanas and love and whatever else, so maybe then a person's not going to become wealthy. So there are all these potential answers that either redefine wealth or that say that there's a more complicated calculus than just determining exactly what a person gets rewarded for everything. But the ikar is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made Klal Yisrael with certain midos. We are Rachmanim Baishadim and Gomei Chasadim, and we should continue to live up to those character traits.